U.S. Pain Foundation survey reported pain also remains one of the leading reasons why Americans seek healthcare. Mm-hmm. We have a conundrum, right? Because then the National Institute of Health, right, the NIH, which we have all come to know so well this year and a half. So the NIH dedicates less than 2% of funding to pain research. And as of 2018, 96% of medical schools in the United States did not require students to take courses on pain medicine. Welcome to Salad with a Side of Fries. I'm your host, Jenn, talking wellness and weight loss for real life. We're here to clear up the myths, misinformation, bad science, and marketing to teach you how to eat and how to cheat. Are you ready? I'm having salad with a side of fries. Hey, welcome back to Salad with a Side of Fries. I'm Jenn, your host, of course, here with you every week. And joining me today is Christine. Christine, welcome back.
Hi, Jen.
So I know you and I talk all the time, but the last time you were here with our Salad with a Side of Fries crew was end of May. Mm-hmm. So how was summer?
So far, so good. It's still summer.
Right.
We've got a few more weeks.
Right. September, but
yeah.
And then when you were here, we did an episode called Your Wellness GPS. Mm-hmm. Where we sort of talked about this like multidisciplinary approach and trying to figure out how you know what you need. And I sort of feel like today, and by the way, you're back because today's conversation is like the prequel, I think, to that one.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So today, guys, we are talking about pain. And yes, like pain as in uncomfortable, pain as in stress, pain as in all the things. September actually is Pain Awareness Month. So we're doing our part, spread awareness and stigma, right?
And
Help people heal.
Hashtag right. Pain counts.
Exactly. Hashtag pain counts. That's actually the name of this episode.
Mm-hmm.
So all the things, we're here for it. Before we get into the nitty gritty, I want to talk about our membership. So are you a member? Do you know we have a membership? Especially for you, our valued Salad with the Side of Fries listeners. So here's the deal. It's $10 a month, for which you get weekly recipes, a monthly article or tool, extra discounts from me and our partners, plus access to live Q&A sessions with me. Honestly, a bargain. If you take advantage of the full offering, it's free, right? You get more value than that $10 a month. Truly a simple, economical way to show yourself that your health is a priority. Plus, by being a member, you support this podcast and this community so we can continue bringing you new episodes and new experts every single week. So this week, members, you are getting, oh my goodness, so many things. Okay, so first, it's a recipe for cinnamon spiced apple and grape salad, which packed with anti-inflammatory foods like walnuts and grapes and cinnamon. So fitting for today's topic. And also perfect for this time of year where we're sort of in between warmer and cooler temperatures. Apples also, this is like the perfect season for apples. So you're going to love it. I'm also sending you an article called Foreskin Conditions Directly Related to Insulin Resistance. So that's from our friends over at Levels Health. I just think it's fascinating how we can see so concretely the connection between seemingly very different systems in the body. Also something we'll talk more about today. And it's September, so it's the last month of the quarter. Also my birthday, also Christine's birthday. So my birthday was yesterday, and Christine's birthday is in about 10 days. So not only is it birthday month, as the last month of the quarter, it's time for your live Q&A session. And I'm doing it as a one-on-one because I seriously love chatting with you guys. Some of you have already booked. We've already had some of the conversations. A couple of you guys have booked for later this month, but make sure if you haven't already, everything to schedule your time is in this week's email. So, I mean, I think, first of all, not only does it make me super happy to every time I get to chat with you, but I think you'll appreciate like having your specific questions answered, you know, just you and me for 30 minutes. So to get all these goodies, you have to make sure you're a member. go to glow.fm/salad with a side of fries, or just click the link in the show notes. Once you're there, it's 3 clicks, and then you're official. You will get this week's recipe for the cinnamon spice apple and grape salad, the article 4 skin conditions directly related to insulin resistance, and all the details for your live one-on-one session with me. So remember, glow.fm/salad with a side of fries, or click the link in the show notes. You could do it right now. It's really simple. Okay. So Christine, let's talk about this pain thing. Oh, at the jump, I want to preface all this by saying most of what we're talking about today comes from a few sources. One being Dr. Rachel Zoffness of Kaiser out in California, the U.S. Pain Foundation, Curable. I would say those are the biggest ones, but there are plenty of resources out there, so you can dig into this more, whether it's learning more for yourself or someone you love or whatever. Tons of resources. And so we're going to do our best today. But so starting with that, and then I think maybe what we really need to have the foundation of understanding pain itself and the challenges that our system has in treating it, right? Because as Rachel Zoffness says, pain is a ubiquitous human phenomenon. And my favorite part is we all deserve to understand it. Mm-hmm. You're very quiet.
No, it's the idea of the mind and the body. I think we have one of each.
And little did you know, they're connected.
And that pain is definitely related and happens in both places. And so we're going to go way deep into that today.
Yeah. So I think a piece of this that makes it challenging is any age, and meaning people of any age can suffer from pain. And there are so many different causes and so many different sources that it makes it, I think, just really complicated to understand sometimes. And it doesn't need to be. Our objective today is to simplify all of that. Mm-hmm. But I think as we look at the traditional system of treatment that we have in the U.S., it feels difficult.
It's pretty simplistic approach to a very complicated situation. So you really want to parse out what pain has in common, like all the different triggers, all the different causes, all the different outflow. We can figure out what it has in common and then go in with some really effective tools. And therefore, we're kind of simplifying your end of it.
Right.
In terms of what you would do about it.
Yeah, so just some stats, foundational pieces. So according to, from the CDC through the U.S. Pain Foundation, 50 million Americans endure pain every day. 20 million Americans live with high impact pain, which means that their pain significantly impacts their life. Headaches, in fact, are often considered the most painful condition of mankind.
I said to Jenn, unless you've just stubbed your toe.
Right.
And then that would be the most painful.
Right, which made me think of, when you hit your elbow in just the right spot.
Right. The funny bone.
Right. And then I think another piece of all of this is the isolation and depression that often comes. Side effect is the wrong word, but it's almost in conjunction with this pain. Because if you're in serious pain, it can be difficult to carry on a conversation. Or, so then you're choosing not to be around other people. Or if you are around other people, it's not something they can generally see. And so the compassion and the sympathy is really hard sometimes. Because we just don't know unless somebody says something, but then you don't want to be the friend who's always talking about how much pain they're in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because to even the best friend,
right,
to have the kind of conversation that these 20 million Americans who are in severe pain every day, day in and day out, can you imagine, someone coming up to you and just saying, so how you doing? And again, oh, my back, or oh, my menstrual cramps, or oh, my headaches, so they've heard it all before. So now you're really isolated even more. So a lot of people just choose to not even socialize as much, but that definitely adds to the severity of the pain.
Yeah, and then we have the issue of chronic and acute pain. So I think it's the IDC, right? Your doctor's diagnostic codes define chronic as 3 or more months or beyond expected healing time. Then U.S. Pain Foundation talks about chronic pain as pain that persists for most days or every day for 6 months or more. For some, it can last a lifetime. And they say chronic pain is different for every person, from the initial underlying cause to what it feels like. Chronic pain can burn, it can ache, saps your energy, prevents you from doing the things you want or need to do. And that's all the opposite side of the coin, sort of, from acute pain. So Cleveland Clinic says, acute pain is pain that comes on suddenly and is caused by something specific. Mm-hmm. So then acute can also lead to chronic. And so I think that's also why our traditional system of treatment is so misshapen when it comes to pain, right? We try to put it in a bucket of acute or chronic, this kind or that kind, this location on the body or that location on the body.
But it doesn't explain everything. There are even times where the acute pain, which comes on suddenly when you go and have your MRIs and all the different tests, they might not find anything, even with acute pain. What happens sometimes is if you carefully look at your life, you'll see that there were some other things going on in terms of stress. So when you pick up that paperclip on the floor and your back went out, then when they go and look, there's no degeneration, there's no nerve pain, they can't even find anything, and there you are, you can't even get up out of the chair in the doctor's office. So what happened when you picked up that paperclip? So sometimes there are some other things going on that are not tissue damage per se.
Well, I remember, so this was maybe 2015, I want to say, my lower back was in so much, and I felt spasms. It was insane. I went to so many doctors. I insisted on tests because they would look at me and go, nothing's wrong. So then I insisted on radiology things to try to find this thing, because I'm I get that you think this is normal, but it's not my normal, right? And I just kept pushing, and eventually I ended up at a practitioner who found that it was really things that were tight in my hip, much more musculoskeletal, but there were things in my hip that then I felt it pulling in my back, but it was really stuff, going on in my hip, and then also stress. So now the fact that I was taking, an hour out of my day to walk to this practitioner to get this, to take care of myself in the midst of all these things, we could get into it all. But I think the point of all of this, insofar as we're talking about our traditional medical system, is if it's not seeable on some sort of x-ray or scan or whatever, our doctors often say, oh, it's all in your head. There's nothing real going on. And that's so dismissive, but I think our doctors are really uncomfortable talking about this. So they reduce it to something simple, but it's complicated. Or, they tell us it's all in our head, and that feels, like I said, dismissive, or, but really it's just that it's not part of their training, So this is interesting. I think this was reported by the U.S. Pain Foundation, but they said healthcare practitioners feel less sympathy and dislike patients more and suspect deception when there's no clear medical explanation for a patient's pain. Right? So the idea of not being able to understand it or see it makes doctors very uncomfortable. And then it went on to say, unfortunately, people with chronic pain have greatly suffered from this. And U.S. Pain Foundation survey reported 74% of respondents indicated that they have been living with their pain for at least 10 years. 34% living with it for more than 20 years. Pain also remains one of the leading reasons why Americans seek healthcare. Mm-hmm. We have a conundrum, right? Because then the National Institute of Health, right, the NIH, which we have all come to know so well this year and a half. So the NIH dedicates less than 2% of funding to pain research. And as of 2018, 96% of medical schools in the United States did not require students to take courses on pain medicine. Like, we have a major gap in healing and health.
Mm-hmm. At the same time, there has been research and almost on the periphery because doctors and like Rachel Zoffness and different pain management centers, they've actually come a long way, which we'll go into in a little while, that there are things that you can say about pain and there are ways of treating. So rather than having all that be, and I do acupuncture, so, you know, I definitely treat pain. So our goal is to, rather than have that on the periphery and definitely not covered by insurance, that we could bring it into the mainstream and have all the options available when it comes to pain.
Exactly. And so before we sort of dig into all of that, I think the results of all of where we've been up to, I think, you know, the last couple of years is that there's a lot of stigma around all of this. There's a stigma of being in pain or that it's just depression, you know, stigma about talking about the role of all of these things. And when I think for a lot of health professionals in what we're all talking about and what we're going to talk about in this episode, there's a lot of stigma around this shift in perspective. Mm-hmm. And I think the more we talk about it and the more everybody's aware of it, it's part of why we're doing this. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah. Because there are ways of talking to people who are in pain where you're on their side.
Yeah.
And sometimes what comes across is that I wrote an article about it. You know, why are we not able to explain this very well? And what happens is as we're going through the different tools, that a person who's in pain might say, I've tried all these things. I've already done all that. How can you're very naive for offering these solutions. And what Jenn and I are saying is, like, within the solutions we're offering is the fact that we combine them and the fact that we have a whole different attitude. It's a shift in how we think about pain. And so sometimes the exact same breathing exercises, when done in a different way with a different approach to what we're thinking and what our thoughts are in our mind, that's going to change the results that you get. And now all of a sudden your pain is less. So just be patient in terms of it's blending the old and the new.
Right. So we'll talk more about that, but I think to start in that conversation, we want to talk about understanding biopsychosocial. So, frankly, all health is biopsychosocial. It's the premise of this podcast. Everything we talk about is addressing wellness and health from all three aspects, but especially what we've come to learn in the science is that pain is biopsychosocial. So bio is, like tissue, right? The brain itself, right? Very physical. Psycho is our thoughts and emotions, right? The mental, emotional. So how we think about our body, or how we think, are we stressed? Are we in fight or flight response, right? All of those things. What's our mood? All that stuff. And then social, we talk about it often, family and friends and our community, right? But social in this context also relates to like socioeconomic. Like that is a major impact on your access to care, culture, religion,
work.
Yeah, work. And, does somebody around you have pain, or is there fear in social situations or things like that? And so that also combines the mental emotional, right? So basically what we see is every piece of this includes all three factors: bio, psycho, and social. And there's really concrete evidence. So phantom limb pain, right? So phantom limb pain is like maybe somebody, whether it was from an accident or, maybe, like diabetics even, right, can lose limbs. So like phantom limb pain is somebody who lost a limb for whatever reason, and then that limb is not even attached to their body, but they still have pain there, right? So that's telling us, right, the brain, the pain is far beyond the physical thing, because that physical limb is not even there, right? So that it's not tissue at that point.
Well, also the story that I've been going to physical therapy for a chronic hip issue, and my physical therapist said that in school they told him there's something called dissociative disorder, and I think we used to call it multiple personalities years ago, and that this one gal had a frozen shoulder in one of her personalities and complete range of motion and complete mobility in the other personality. So here in the same body, one personality had taken on this frozen shoulder and the other was like, oh, I'm going to go play softball. So again, it just reinforces this idea that a lot of this is happening between the brain and the body.
Yeah. And I mean, I always talk about it with my clients, like butterflies in your stomach when you get nervous, right? That's a physiological response to even a thought. Right? We think about a presentation that we have to give, and we start to get, we have that anxious feeling. That's a physical response to a thought. So the idea that we're going to separate those two when it comes to pain seems really silly when we think about it.
And this is also not new, because in Chinese medicine, the description of anxiety is running piglet syndrome. So you can picture all these piglets running around your chest. So they've identified that mind-body connection, from 200 BC, which is a long time, that we're only now coming to say, okay, how about we pay attention to this and figure out solutions to these challenges?
Yeah. And so there's a lot of pain conditions, right? There are a lot of diagnoses that people get, especially or when we sort of don't know what's causing the pain, and people end up going to 20 different doctors and trying to figure it out. And then maybe there's finally you get to some sort of diagnosis, which then gives you a black and white perspective on, oh, it's this, not that, or whatever. But in a lot of those diagnoses, it's really hard to understand what causes them, right? But in the research of looking at people with these diagnoses of pain conditions, one of the things that they do see commonly present is trauma. And, with veterans, the research is PTSD and then physical pain. These things go together. And trauma can be hard, right? The word can make us uncomfortable, and full disclosure, I think the last year and a half is trauma. And so for all of us who are experiencing stress and discomfort and whatever it is, of course you are. And it's part of why we're having this conversation, #pain counts, right? Even if it's not sending you to an ER, even if it's not crippling you, it counts, and it's communicating with us, and it's telling us that something is going on. Mm-hmm. So what they see a lot of times with the trauma is that it's really what ends up happening, the biological side, is that our nervous system is on overdrive. So it's the fight or flight system is on and firing and working on overdrive, right? Our brain actually changes to make sure that it can protect us from any future threat, right? So it almost becomes we become hypersensitive or hyper aware of what's around us so that our brain can protect us. And so that can create some physical sensations and things like that. So there's lots of studies on all this. There's also a ton of studies about what we call adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. And so studies show that children with early childhood trauma are more likely to develop chronic pain and chronic illness later in life, right? Because the brain almost becomes sensitized to the biopsychosocial impact of all of these things, right? So like what we see, brain and body are so incredibly connected, and trauma becomes a potential trigger, or maybe trigger's a better word. I know you're big on that.
Yeah, I think that for those of you who are saying right now, my pain didn't come from any trauma, I had a great childhood, my life has been great. If you look back to when the pain started, quite often there's a trigger, and trigger could be as subtle as different kinds of stressors going on in your
like
life.
Changing a job.
Exactly. It could be
passing of a loved one.
Right. And it can be viral. You know, there can be some, speaking of pandemics, but there have been viruses that are not identified that sometimes, you might have had one night. I know my mother had an autoimmune response. One night she had a very high fever, and they're not even sure what was wrong with her. And from that, she ended up with rheumatoid arthritis, which is a very painful ongoing condition.
Yeah. And we could think of it like, the technical term is central sensitization, right? Where we end up with this vicious cycle of pain creating more pain. And there is a biological piece of it where it's like short circuit, in the nervous system. But I think we can also think of it the same way we think of building a muscle, right? And we've talked about it before with like neural pathways, right? The more our brain follows a neural pathway, or as you maybe have heard or remember from some sort of like science class, right? Neurons that fire together, wire together, right? Thank you, Dr. Z and Rachel Zoffness. So when we have these pain experiences and we have this neural pathway, it's like a muscle where the more we work a muscle, right? If you continue to do bicep curls, your bicep's going to get bigger. If we continue to have this pattern of experience, it becomes chronic, right? In the triggering between an event and then a physical sensation. And so, it's like, Dr. Zoffness also used this example of like, dogs are highly sensitive to smells. We can become that same way with pain, right? Where it becomes overly sensitive in our nervous system, and then the pain becomes ever present.
Mm-hmm. They had a slow-mo film of Jackie Joyner-Kersee, who was an Olympian from, I think, the 80s. She had, I don't know if she fell or if she twisted her ankle coming around the bend. And then 4 years later, when she was back at the Olympics, they slowed down the film. I think she won the event, but she definitely hitched her step right at the exact same place that she had twisted it that 4 years earlier. Now,
wow.
She may not have even been on that particular track, but the memory came back. So we all kind of do that, where you pull back when you've had something happen to you. Now, when you go into that same situation, you're again on hyper alert.
Yeah, it's like the body has a memory, whether you're consciously thinking of it or not. The body remembers. And so it's funny, like, we become more sensitive rather than less sensitive in something. And we've talked about this before with like the opioid crisis, and a lot of the meds for pain don't desensitize the brain like we think they do. In fact, what the research shows us is that they sensitize the brain to pain. They can make us more sensitive to that sensory input.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's why they say after a while the medicines don't work anymore. So it's not an accident. It's that your brain actually, will take on any, small little impulse, and all of a sudden you're in pain again, even with the medications. So
like it used to take somebody pushing you, and now the wind blows.
Right.
That's extreme, but right?
Mm-hmm.
I think, we'll talk more about overcoming all of this, but it's really interesting. So part of handling pain and healing pain is to desensitize the brain. And it's really counterintuitive because it's the opposite of what we want to do. Like, our brain is telling us to steer clear, but what we actually have to do is small, gradual, very measured, monitored, controlled exposure. Thank you. That's the word. Yeah. So I want to get into this more after a brief message from our partner, DNA Miracles. Because every child is a miracle, DNA Miracles provides the highest quality body and wellness products designed for babies, children, and expectant mothers. All products are gentle, easy to use, and 100% effective when used as directed. DNA Miracles partner with leading health professionals and scientists who follow the highest standards in ingredient selection to create the most effective skin, hair, and health solutions. As natural as possible, DNA Miracles is the best and safest option on the market for you and your little miracle. From expert pediatricians to real family testimonials, everyone has fallen in love with DNA Miracles. So we're talking today a lot about the brain and the body. So the brain, right, I've mentioned this to you guys before, the DNA Miracles omega-3s. And then we talk about the body, and we're going to talk about this more after, but the gut is incredibly powerful for serotonin and a lot of our other healing and health and all these things. So I highly, highly recommend the DNA Miracles digestive enzymes. They are incredibly powerful. Sometimes I even recommend them to adults. We just need a little bit higher of a dose because they're really a fantastic formula of digestive enzymes with probiotics. So if you're a gut health challenged human or you want to help your kids have the best, microbiome, right, to help deal with their food and their mood and all of those things, I highly recommend both the DNA Miracles omega-3s and the digestive enzymes. So to get 10% off your order, text the word miracles, MIRACLES, to 844-947-4846. You'll receive the link and coupon code right to your phone. Again, simply text the word miracles to 844-947-4846. This is a toll-free number. Standard text and data rates may apply. All right. So understanding pain as biopsychosocial, how do we go about understanding, the people around us who are suffering and for our own healing? So like we were just saying before, it's sort of like the biohack is, as Dr. Zoffness says, undo the mixed messages, which is undo the stigma, undo the separation of the mind and body. Like, let's reconnect them. Let's start to think about this as a whole. And understanding biopsychosocial, we can then implement healing processes and methodologies that address all three components. Because what we see over and over is that if we only address one piece of it, or we think the others don't exist, it's not getting us to where we want to be. So I feel like we can think of it as like we have this Venn diagram, right? There's like the biological, the psychological, the social or sociological. And in the center, right, the piece of that Venn diagram where everything overlaps is not only our pain, but also our path to healing.
It's so great that the solutions are built into the understanding of all this.
Exactly. So that's what I want to focus on now. So like we had said before, there's measured, monitored exposures, right? The way, out of pain is through it, which is counterproductive and not what we want to do. But there's a lot of things that can help us do that. Right. So a lot of the experts, right, all the people that I mentioned before, talk a lot about CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy, right, which many of us are familiar with. Then there's also something called biofeedback. So biofeedback, I describe it as like learning to connect the thoughts and the physical sensations. What are the ones that go together? And then I also sort of describe this as like mindfulness on steroids. Mm-hmm. Like, this is not easy. And like, we want to work with somebody who can help us do this. But it's an exercise in connecting those physical sensations to the thoughts that create them, as well as the physical sensations and the thoughts that they create.
And also like building a muscle. It's the
Yes.
same, yes.
Yeah. And part of what happens when we do this, right, when we get better at identifying those connections, is we start to shift, again, going back to like a science word, like the locus of control, right? So instead of it being very external, it becomes very internal, and we recognize that we have some control over how we experience this and how this manifests in the body. And then, again, the biopsychosocial looks like stress reduction techniques, our exercise and activity, our nutrition, our sleep, our community, who we surround ourselves with, literally everything we talk about on this podcast in every episode. I mean, it's really looking at it from all the angles. You look like you want to say something.
Yeah, that when you think about just like what part of the brain is working as well, like we can actually shift some of those things. That when you talk about stress management, you're not just relaxing your body, you're actually changing what part of your brain is actually getting all the nutrients and expanding the little tiny blood vessels and receiving information. So now the nerves are working better. So basically the front of the brain is what we're targeting here. So the more you can relax the back of the brain, and through these exercises, there's we'll talk about the vagus nerve and different things, that actually how it changes you is sometimes helpful, because then you're not just like doing these rote exercises because, somebody on a podcast told us to do it. Now I understand why I'm doing it, and that actually also will help in terms of pain.
Yeah, and that brings up a really good point that I probably should have mentioned earlier, is that in studying pain and the brain, I think we used to think that it was like one part of the brain, right? Like the limbic system, which is a lot of our emotions. But the truth is there's a lot of different parts of the brain that are always activated. And so focusing on any one individually isn't going to solve the problem either, right? So the point that you're bringing up is really important for us to remember, where is this happening? So actually studies show, so if we think about pain, right, as like a volume dial, okay, we can turn up and turn down the volume on pain. So what turns it up, right? Turning up the pain is focusing on the pain, right? As it often says, like where our attention goes, right? What we focus on expands. So if we're focusing on the pain, it turns up the volume. If we're stressed, if we're in a bad mood, if our emotions are, sort of in a negative place, if anxiety, all of these things turn up the volume on pain, right? And so brain sends the signal, right? In the nervous system, right? Fight or flight is on. We're turning up the volume on pain. We're highly sensitive to make sure that we survive, right? The prefrontal cortex, like you were just talking about, depending on what we're focusing on, can turn up or turn down, depending on how we're functioning. So it's like thinking about all the stress reduction techniques, laughter, right? So Scientific American published an article about laughter as medicine for pain. And so when we recognize that as much as what turns up the volume from our brain, the same things, like the opposite of these things, is then also true, that we can turn down the volume on that pain dial. So I'm just looking through my notes to make sure that some of these studies show the pain volume going down when we treat the emotions and the thoughts and coping behaviors, right? So we see it in the science part, biopsychosocial. When we address the emotions, the pain volume goes down. When we start to feel less negative about it, the pain volume goes down. When, like, think about, like the day starts And the pain is all we can focus on as we're like getting ready. But then as we get into our day, we start doing emails. We're thinking about other things. And the pain goes away. The volume turns down, right? As we're focusing on other things because our focus has gone elsewhere. And then going to bed.
And that's all you're thinking about at night. Yeah. The good thing about the idea of the pain volume knob, thank you, Rachel, is that it definitely still supports the idea that the pain is real.
Right.
That when people say it's all in your head or you can control it just by your thoughts and think different things, or as Cher said, snap out of it. That you can like almost like dismiss the advice because if they're not taking you seriously. But the idea, yes, my pain is real. I have my, things going on in my back or my hip or my knees. Yes, that's real. And the tissues can be either damaged or not damaged, but the pain is real. And all we're talking about now is turning down the volume on the pain.
Right. It makes me think about when you and I were talking about this before, what came to me as we were talking about this is the need for habits and routines, right? Because part of this, when we're in that pain, is to find the motivation to change those thoughts, to do the stress reduction exercise or whatever it is, right? So it made me think if we can create habits and routines, especially for the morning, that sort of automate getting us through to the point in our day where the pain is less, then we're relying less on that motivation and we're getting ourselves to the point in the day where that pain dial is turned down. Because if we're constantly relying on that motivation, which comes from the prefrontal cortex, it can be even harder. And then the other side of that is, as you put it, detangling the back of the brain. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I mean, basically it's an either-or situation. There's either going to be a lot of metabolism, which is all your nutrients, your oxygen, your blood flow. It's either going to be going to the back of the brain or what I call the middle of the brain, the emotions. So either survival brain, emotion brain. But if all that's relaxed and all those capillaries are open and all the nerves are firing, guess what gets metabolized? The front of the brain. And the front of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, is where the big picture and the creativity and the motivation. So if you can keep that part of the brain metabolized more and only go into brief episodes of the survival brain, it's not to say we'll never shut that down completely. It's there for you. I mean, even
it saves our lives.
Even pain is there for you, So to say thank you to the pain, thank you for allowing me to survive, but I've had enough of you right now because I want to get on with my life. So then,
I got it. I'm aware.
Right.
Thank you for relax.
Thank you for sharing.
Right. Yeah.
And so then the front of the brain is where like thriving comes from. That's the part of the brain where we can go on to complete our tasks, learn new things, focus on things, all that requires a different part of the brain. So all these things are just helpful to get you in that mode as much as possible. It's not going to be 100%, but even if it's 50% compared to being in pain all day, good job.
Right. So things that we can do, right, to help detangle the back of the brain, meditation is a big piece of it. Christine, I know you do source code meditation, which is a little complicated for the average, but I don't know.
Well, you can look it up. It's source code meditation. There's a website, and that's exactly what I'm describing, is that you would be like relaxing the back of the brain and then allowing the front of the brain to have this metabolism. It's kind of a system in our body that's already built in, but it just takes a little bit of learning to tap into it. The good news about it is that as you go, all of a sudden you're really starting to have an ongoing experience of this volume being turned down because you've rewired basically your brain, which is really great.
It built that new muscle, a new neural pathway. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing, and we've talked about it before, the vagus nerve. So we've talked about it a bit on the podcast, certainly in the webinars that Christine and I do every month. By the way, Sidebar, if you're not on the email list to get the notifications for those webinars, Christine and I do a webinar every single month. We've talked a lot about the vagus nerve there, and that's really sort of the actual connection between the gut and the brain. And we can basically, the vagus nerve, thinking about it similar to a muscle, is that it can lose tone. So we want to do things that tone or strengthen the vagus nerve. So that could be
my favorite,
the Valsalva, right? Yeah,
cold showers.
Yeah,
sorry,
so
folks.
Jumping in, right? So, but you don't have to spend like an hour in a cold shower. Literally, jump in a cold shower, run around under the water for 10 seconds, and jump out. That'll do it.
Breathing. There's different breathing
Humming.
techniques. Humming, laughing.
And the Valsalva maneuver, right? Think about like when your ears are plugged from an airplane and you sort of plug your nose and close your mouth and try to breathe. That can activate the vagus nerve. Be careful. Protect your eardrums. But little things that we can do, and similar to like everything, we have to do it often to make it sure it works, to build up the tone of the vagus nerve. And I'll come back to some gut stuff in a second. But the other thing that's really interesting that, again, Dr. Rachel Zoffness talks a lot about in her book is sort of when we don't express our emotions, when we keep it all bottled in. And I think this is in particular really important for all of us right now. Because as we talked about before, I have chills as I'm saying this, as we talked about before with triggers or trauma, you know, let's all collectively sigh because the pandemic can very easily be one of those for all of us, whether it's manifesting as physical pain or not, right? Or maybe just not yet. But we can see it and we're experiencing this. And, you know, there's lots of things going on. And one of the things that can happen is that we feel like we have to hold it together for other people. Or maybe in our job, we're, you know, the stake in the ground. We're the one that everybody else comes to or whatever it is. It's really important that even if things are not manifesting physically yet, that we figure out the tools for identifying and expressing our emotions.
Yes, and especially not holding them in, bottling them up. Rachel calls it tea kettling.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of different things you can do to kind of just have that quick release. And so one of the things I remember from therapy a long time ago was you take a tennis racket and you hit a pillow. It's so loud and so satisfying. If you have a place in your life where you can break a bottle and then clean it up later, but that satisfying, you know, loud sound of something that you produced in your frustration. She said, you know, if the tea kettle didn't have that little hole where the steam came out, what would happen? And, you know, it would turn into a bomb, you know, in your kitchen. So how about us with the same thing, trying to bottle up our emotions?
I think of it like punching pillows, or if you remember Grey's Anatomy, they used to, Christina and Meredith in Grey's Anatomy used to go stand at this one spot where it was like a vent and like all the air from, I don't even remember what mechanical system in the hospital was coming up through this vent. And so they would stand on it and it would like blow their hair back and they'd just stand there, you know, or they'd go somewhere. Oh, there's, what was that other show? The Bold Type. Newer show, The Bold Type. They would go into the subway, hold hands and scream as the train went by.
Yeah.
But it's that loud noise. It's this release of emotion. I mean, even just punching a pillow, you know, or, and I'm sort of skipping ahead for a second, but even teaching our kids how to identify the emotions and what they're feeling and how are they going to express it? And maybe expressing that is talking it out or, you know, writing something down or spending some time alone, but somewhere where it's not all just staying inside and we're pretending like there's nothing. And by the way, my favorite thing that Dr. Zoffness talked about, and there's a reason why this sticks in my brain, is that cursing has, as she says, an analgesic effect. That it actually releases stress and frustration, which helps us reduce those negative emotions. So when I worked in hedge funds and, you know, My boss would swear at me, right? I mean, maybe that's other boundaries and issues, right? But I mark every episode explicit because I have a potty mouth. And so now nobody could get mad at me. I'm just going to say whatever comes out as I'm sitting here holding back some
treating
right,
yourself.
Right. But so, figure out what your thing is to tea kettle, as she says. And then again, right, actually treating the pain from all of these different pieces. And so I think it turns out, too, as we think about biopsychosocial and the fact that the disconnect of our health professionals, or some of our health professionals, in dismissing what we're experiencing can actually exacerbate the pain that you're feeling. And so there's something to be said for surrounding ourselves with people, or as Z-Dog MD calls it, right, the therapeutic alliance.
Right. And this is when people, it when you see it. It's like pornography. You know it when you see it. It's that when someone is listening to you and someone is nodding and affirming, and they're not interrupting you, and they're not bringing in their own agenda or reminding you of their pain and their problems. If they call it active listening. If they're really listening to you, that's the person to go with. Mm-hmm.
I'm actively listening. No, I'm just kidding.
As case in point.
Right. And so with all of that, it helps us understand this comprehensive approach. And so then when and if somebody says, oh, it's in your head, or you're just depressed, right? There's also this thing where we look at meds for those things too. And maybe there's a more comprehensive approach. It doesn't have to be 100% due to chemicals, right? Like if you're experiencing these things, which is highly understandable at any given moment in life, right? You're not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with your brain. There's nothing wrong with your body. Everything is biopsychosocial. So we want to think about the connection between our thoughts and our mood and our emotions and the people around us. And, listen, like I was just talking about my dysfunctional, toxic work environment, mm-hmm. right? Like that's going to impact it too. That's probably a big piece of why I had that crazy back pain when the doctor was like, there's nothing wrong with you, right? So, we can be triggered. There's a lot of causes. We have a comprehensive approach. And I think this also brings up, I was talking about before, the gut stuff, right? And we talk about mood. So there is evidence that 80 to 90% of the body's serotonin, we think of serotonin, right? That's the feel-good stuff.
Right.
Right? So 80 to 90% of the body's serotonin lives in the gut. So if that's the case, then the gut is much more the center of emotion than our brain. So, right, we get a stomach ache when we're super nervous. Maybe, your kids, right? Number one sign of stress and anxiety in kids is stomach, and then stomach aches, and as Christine pointed out before, we were talking headaches.
Right. And a lot with the stomach, you'll hear all these diagnoses like irritable bowel and mm-hmm. all the different, and it's very upsetting, like if you're having like diarrhea or something and you can't leave the house. To me, that's a kind of pain,
Yes.
There are emotional injuries that to me are right up there with physical pain. So, we don't you normally think of anxiety or depression or embarrassment or any of these other emotions. We don't think of them as pain, but to me, it's those are injuries. I would call them injuries.
Yeah, and it goes back to the vagus nerve stuff, right? That especially, so if our emotion is starting in our gut, and with the vagus nerve, if you think of it like a 5-lane highway or a 4-lane highway, right? And 3 out of the 4 or 4 out of the 5 go gut to brain, and only 1 or 2 goes brain to gut. It explains why we can't think our way out of certain things. So it's funny, I was listening to somebody else's podcast, and they were interviewing somebody who was talking about, especially, and, you know, pertaining to what we talk about all the time here, pertaining to weight, they were calling it weight loss. I would call it weight management. How we have to get our thoughts right first. And I was having a conversation with somebody the other day of explaining I approach things from a chemical side first. Because if we're trying to, and I talked about this in our willpower episode, I think if we're trying to think our way through a situation, we're like white knuckling it. And if you're trying to think your way over chemistry, it's really hard. Right. You know, so if we could choose some foods that support our gut, that give us the serotonin, that give our brain what it needs to actually make some of these neurotransmitters to help our body properly respond to leptin and ghrelin, and we can handle some of the chemical things first, then our brain can actually think.
Right. And it really is like, it's a dance.
Yeah.
You know, it's a dance. And to anybody who tells you it's a one-sided dance, they're missing the fun of what it's what it's like to dance with a partner or many partners, you know, that if you look at all the different aspects of this at the same time, and we're not telling you to do everything in one day. You know, it can be that you rotate your solutions. So you might just start a little bit of walking or exercising when, you know, previously you were couch ridden or bedridden, you know, so then the next day you'll try a new recipe like Jenn's salad that sounds delicious, you know, so there's so many things that we can incorporate that you don't need to feel that this is a military regime here.
Oh no. Yeah. In fact, it is the opposite.
Yeah.
Right? And then another piece of this, and I can't remember where this came from, so forgive me if you are listening and this was yours. But there was another piece that I was reading that was talking about notice your ants, your automatic negative thoughts. Right? What are your default negative thoughts, and where are those coming in, and how does that connect to everything? And again, like starting to play with this whole dance between what we're thinking, what we're feeling emotionally, what we're feeling physically, you know, all of this stuff coming together.
And also the social piece of that you can employ. I just was on a call earlier today where a woman actually asked for our help. There was a group of 4 of us, and she was having negative thoughts about something that was happening in her body. And we all gave her other ideas about, well, it could be this, it could be that, it could be this other, because she was asking us, how else could I think about this? And by the end, you could see this big smile. And so sometimes you have to throw those negative thoughts that you personally think to yourself in your isolation, throw them out to some of your friends and family, if you can trust them, and you get some feedback like, why would you ever think that about yourself? You know, I see you as, you know, this loving, wonderful person, you know, so some of our shadows and unconscious thoughts are not very kind. So when you bring them out into the light of day, you might get some feedback that surprises you that other people are much more generous than we are to ourselves.
Amen. Right, which goes back to, we did an episode about going against the textbook, right? How do we talk about all this wellness stuff? But then also, how do we talk to ourselves? You know, that's a big piece of it. And so other people see every situation, personal, professional, whatever it is, right? When people have a little distance and it's not theirs, they can see things very clearly. And they see things that we don't see when it's our own. You know, so having those people to actually... Next week's interview is a lot on this of, you know, when we have those people in our lives that we do talk about this stuff with, and how special those relationships are. But this whole conversation, right, about the thinking component of it brings up something that Christine, you and I talk about all the time that I find so fascinating, but also is terribly misunderstood. And that's the placebo effect. It's so frustrating because I think it's thrown around, right? It has such a negative connotation. But if we take a step back, holy shit. Like, what it's actually telling us is that if we think something is going to work, it does. Right? Like in these studies, when we talk about like, oh, we're testing something against placebo, Right? And even people in the placebo group had had improvement. What it's telling us concretely is that our brain can facilitate healing if we think it has some extra support to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, wow, how amazing.
I think it might be Dr. Rachel, but it's this idea of with the therapeutic alliance with your doctor, they can, if they, because especially with the white coat, like how many people's blood pressure goes up when they get nervous around their doctor. Yeah. But the opposite can happen. Like if you really feel like you're being supported, like if you have a wonderful exercise teacher or a yoga teacher, and after class they listen to you and they see you, and they maybe make comments during the class that they know exactly what your issues are, and they've thought about it and arranged an alternative for you. That's really supportive. And so in that case, the placebo effect can be a positive thing, and so what we want to do is kind of like take it back, like take control back of what we think about that. I mean, like I think what happens in the drug trials is that the reason a placebo effect might be poo-pooed is that they want the drug to work.
Right.
And sometimes it only works like 10% better or some small, it has to be a certain percentage before the drug can even get approved. But sometimes it's very small when you actually see the studies. And so, in my mind, without any side effects, give me some placebo, please.
Seriously. I just think it's so interesting. And how many ways can we employ the placebo effect? Right? By shifting those thoughts, by thinking that these efforts, all these little things are doing something. Like I actually asked you this question. I don't know if you remember this. So you were our first ever interview on this podcast, Christine. And I asked you, what's the difference in people who do see an impact or improvement with acupuncture and those who don't?
Right.
And I think my question was, is it just that they believe it's going to work?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But there's a piece of that in saying if we're walking into any sort of treatment scenario with a doubt, that's powerful.
Yeah.
And if we're walking into any treatment scenario with hope and possibility, that's powerful too.
Mm-hmm.
And we can actually reclaim control of all of our healing.
Mm-hmm. And it's not to say that, for instance, if you've tried a bunch of things, which I'm sure people in pain have, that, maybe someone would recommend acupuncture to you and then, I've tried that already, and that's understandable. You've been disappointed. That didn't alone, maybe acupuncture alone didn't work. But in terms of what we're talking about today, had you also been coached with, how you're sleeping and what your diet is, all the other stressors of your life, that the acupuncture would have had more of a chance. So it's a holistic approach to you, not so much what the techniques are, and so you can grow into a placebo effect is what I'm saying. It's not that you have to walk in the door and already believe that, here I am at the hypnotist and I don't know what hypnotism is and I'm not sure it's going to work for me. That's understandable. But by the results that you get, maybe then the placebo effect will kick in more.
Absolutely. I think it's so cool. So it's funny the way the universe works also, because as I was putting everything together for our conversation today, an alert popped up on my phone with an article. And so I saw it in Huffington Post. Now, full disclosure, I don't know if that's where it was originally published or not. It's an article written by Miriam Jacobson, and it's really her story of losing her father on 9/11. And of course, there's a reason this showed up in my phone today, but I found it to be such a profound example of exactly what we're talking about. So I wanted to share it with you guys. So it says, I was 13 when my father was killed on 9/11. It's taken me 20 years to heal. So part of this, and I'm reading right from it, she said, the trauma had taken up residence in my body, settling deep into my nervous system. At 13, I feared being alone and suffered from migraines, back pain, stomach pain, and debilitating fatigue. My body absorbed what my brain couldn't yet process. Night after night, I comforted myself with spoonfuls of marshmallow fluff and sleeves of Oreo cookies. I'm skipping ahead a little bit. So then she moved, right? She felt like she had developed this reputation as the girl who lost her dad, right? So she moved to go to college now and thought this would be better, right? Fresh start. And then each anniversary of 9/11, it would come up in conversation. And she said, the mere mention of 9/11 assaulted me. My body instantly flooded with anxiety, my heart sinking into my stomach as the floor caved underneath me. The billows of smoke and explosions hijacked my ability to stay in the present moment and transported me back into the trauma and terror I felt on 9/11. Later, in 2019, at age 31, oh, by the way, in this, when she was in her early 20s, her mother passed away from, was it lung cancer? I think it was lung cancer, again, from breathing in all of the air. And then for her, in 2019, at age 31, I received a breast cancer diagnosis, also a known World Trade Center related illness. Upon hearing the news, a cold fear washed over me. Underneath the fear, I felt rage. Despite how much I think I recovered from my trauma, 9/11 continues to drain me of so much life and infect every aspect of my existence. Trying to heal from its impact feels like I'm forever drowning beneath its waves, struggling to catch my breath. But now I know what to do. I allow the rage to flow through me, knowing the best way to move beyond pain is to wade in its mucky waters. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's more of this but...
And now she's helping other people.
Right. So now she's a...
functional
nutritionist. Yeah. But so it just goes to show, I think, sometimes even without realizing it, we employ a biopsychosocial approach. But I also think understanding it helps us. Understanding that pain is real, even if your doctor says it's in your head. You say, yes, and it's in my body, And, finding those practitioners who are going to be part of this, therapeutic alliance and work together and create the multidisciplinary approach and look at this from all the angles and, be willing to move through it and, poke it. Mm-hmm. and, like we said, the way past it is really through it.
Mm-hmm. I just want to say the Curable app is something that I've been using for my hip, and I think it's curablehealth.com, and then you can download the Curable app. But they've got lots and lots of writing exercises and tools, and they've got all sorts of experts there and podcasts that you can listen to. And so I really highly recommend, if you're taking baby steps into this whole world, that's another place to not only get information like the Pain Foundation or with Rachel's resources, you get a lot of information. And Rachel's book, her workbook on pain.
Plug for Dr. Rachel Zoffness.
Which is sold out. It's sold out. But it'll come back.
But the workbook, if you have, a practitioner that you trust and you have this relationship with who's maybe not an expert in pain, right? Because as we talked about at the very beginning, it wasn't part of their training. Bring them the workbook or do it together. Or use it, tremendous. So wrapping this up, Dr. Rachel Zoffness, Kaiser out in California, U.S. Pain Foundation, Curable. There's the app. They also have a Facebook group.
Yeah, and Curable Health.
Curablehealth.com. Mm-hmm. There are just tons of resources out there for you to learn more. And, I try to do things justice in our time together, but want to make sure that everybody has all the tools and resources at their disposal. And then the second thing that I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about is that Christine and I really, really, really want to hear about your pain. So we're working on creating a company to offer drug-free integrated approach to pain and stress. So we're curious to learn more from all sorts of people about, your sources of pain and what's working, what's not working. So we invite you to tell us about your pain. I'll put a link in the show notes to an online questionnaire. It's very short. And at the end, you'll have the option of, continuing the conversation with us or not, just simply, sending us info about your pain, but we'd love to hear from you so that we can really develop more tools and resources, to work in combination with your health professionals and in combination with Curable and all these other resources that are out there. Christine, anything else?
Just the last thing, in terms of for people who pain medications are working for you.
Oh, yeah.
That we will work with you. Anotanos is the name of our company, and we will work with you, and that's not a problem at all. We're drug-free, but you don't have to be.
Yeah, and that brings up a good point of also, like, if meds are working for you, keep going. We just want to make sure that there's also tools and resources in place for the long term. Again, not looking at any one thing in isolation, but creating this combination of approaches.
Holistic.
Yes, holistic. All right. That brings us to our nutrition nugget. Are you ready? All right. So this week, we're talking about apple cider. So I feel very passionately about this as a girl who grew up in Michigan because, we lived not far from a cider mill. Apple picking was a thing, right? Apple cider donuts, definitely an activity for the fall. So then a few years ago, it was winter in New York City. It was like a weekend afternoon, and a friend and I stopped at Starbucks, and I'm sensitive to caffeine, so I was like, I want something else, So I'm looking at the menu, and I see it says hot apple cider. And I was like, oh, perfect, right? This is what I'm going to have. So I ordered it, moved to the part of the counter where you pick up your drink, and I saw them take out a jug of apple juice and steam it and serve it to me. And I was beside myself because I was like, I am sorry. As a girl from Michigan, apple juice is not apple cider, right? And then this sort of came up in conversation recently. And I was like, okay, we have to have this conversation here. So really quick, apple cider is unfiltered, unsweetened, unprocessed liquid from pressing apples. So cider is essentially like raw apple juice, and it's juiced by pressing the apples, as opposed to, apple juice, which could be from a juicer. It is also generally processed sweeteners and sugars can be added. It's also, filtered and pasteurized and all the things. So it has a longer shelf life and it creates a consistent taste because, when you have a packaged food, that's important. But so going back to cider for a hot second, because it is unfiltered, unsweetened, unprocessed, it is highly perishable, and it actually has some yeast in it, which can make it a little fizzy sometimes. And then if you let it sit for a long time, it can ferment into alcohol, right? So, I just want to say the differences between apple cider and apple juice, there are technical differences, but in a lot of places, that's really overlooked. There are other places where they just define cider as made from apples that are picked earlier in the season. Or you might just find companies are putting the exact same product on, inside the bottle with two different labels. One says cider and one says juice. So hashtag food marketing, But for those of us, who are thinking about this, there can be a difference. We want to read those labels. For those of you who like hard cider, right? Not all cider is alcoholic like a hard cider. So I feel like it also bears mentioning as we talk about sort of reading labels and understanding it all. You might also see ones that say spiced cider. So that usually has nutmeg and cinnamon. But again, just read your labels so that you know what you're getting. In practice, like with cooking, if something calls for cider or juice, you could honestly use them interchangeably, I think. If it's a smoothie, I would suggest go with water instead of apple juice because who needs the added sugar? Because remember, drinking something, it's essentially concentrating all the sugar, removing all the fiber. So we're really better off eating the whole apple, right? But there's a time and a place. And so if we want some apple cider or apple juice, I'm personally team cider, but it's fall, right? Straight from the cider mill, a little bit hits the spot, right? Now, I know you all want me to talk about apple cider vinegar, because what conversation about apple cider does not talk about apple cider vinegar? And yes, apple cider vinegar is made from apple cider, and it's essentially been fermented twice, right? So the first fermentation gives us that alcohol piece. And then there's a second fermentation, which gets us from alcohol into acetic acid. So the main ingredient in apple cider vinegar is acetic acid and malic acid. So some people tout both apple cider and apple cider vinegar for its anti-inflammatory properties. So yes, there are polyphenols, right? Again, it's coming from apples. So there's polyphenols, or those plant compounds that act like antioxidants in the body, which help fight inflammation. When it comes to apple cider vinegar, though, there are many claims about potential health benefits. And funny enough, when I first started the podcast, there was somebody who was recommended to me who's apparently an expert on apple cider vinegar. And he says, the data actually is mixed, and, it's potentially not as great as everybody wants it to be. So I went digging, right? Basically, there are a lot of claims around apple cider vinegar, and I would say there are two where we do see some really good science behind them. The first is apple cider vinegar can help kill pathogens, including bacteria. So a lot of times that's probably why we see it in terms of preserving food. The second thing that actually has some good science is apple cider vinegar may improve insulin function and lower blood sugar levels after meals, as well as potentially lower fasting blood sugar. But there's a lot of claims around weight loss and fat removal, skin conditions, cholesterol, and blood pressure health. And the research on those, and why I'm not highlighting them, is because either the research is only on animals, there's no human research, or the human trials were just super small sample sizes. Or, some of them, like, the results just aren't that compelling. So I want to give you an example, again, in the context of things that we talk about here, right? So there was a study, it was 175 people with obesity who took apple cider vinegar every day. Those who took 1 tablespoon lost 2.6 pounds. Those taking 2 tablespoons lost 3.7 pounds. So then the study claimed apple cider vinegar reduces belly fat and improved weight loss. But the study was for 3 months. So first of all, that's not exactly what I would call long-term. Second of all, over 3 months, losing somewhere between 2.5 and not quite 4 pounds is about a pound a month. Like, I don't even know if that's statistically significant, depending on what's going on. So I don't know. I think it's just an example of taking these results with a grain of salt. As we all know here, weight loss in general is less important than removing body fat. There is no magic bullet, right? It's really about the small things that we do consistently. So I share this just an example of how we don't necessarily want to take everything at face value, especially, like the claims that we hear about apple cider vinegar. So having said that, you do you, right? If apple cider on occasion, makes you feel good for the fall, or apple cider vinegar seems to be working for you and you notice a difference, or heck, placebo effect, as we've talked about. So, I don't think there's any harm in trying the apple cider vinegar, and see what you notice. So there you have it, my friends, my little soapbox on apple cider versus apple juice and apple cider vinegar. Christine, anything to add
to that discussion? I'm staying far away. Actually, people have been using it for like gargling and things like that. So again, that's probably the antibacterial effect that it would do something for that.
Yeah. So As always, everybody, I'm your host, Jenn Trepeck. Connect with me on Instagram at Jenn Trepeck, JENNTREPECK. Really, all social media, Jenn Trepeck. Instagram also has Salad with a Side of Fries pod. So if you're not following the podcast over there, definitely do that too. Our website is asaladwithasidofries.com. So this is your personal invitation. Send me a message. I'd love to hear from you, whether it's your takeaways, your ideas, any questions you have. This is also the easiest way to learn more about working with me directly. And I am personally inviting you to become a member. Go to glow.fm/saladwithaside-of-fries. Becoming a member shows your support for this podcast, this community, and most importantly, your health. So this week, you will get the recipe for cinnamon spice, apple, and grape salad. The article called Foreskin Conditions Directly Related to Insulin Resistance, and all the details for your live one-on-one session with me. So remember, that's glow.fm/saladwithaside-of-fries, or just click the link in the show notes. So until next week, everybody, remember, pain is real.
Pain counts.
Pain counts. We deserve to understand it, and we deserve to heal. So like all health, pain is biopsychosocial, so addressing it from all three perspectives can help us return to living life with energy and vigor. Well, friends, that's it for today's episode of Salad with a Side of Fries. Congratulations for making yourself and your health a priority. Thanks so much for joining us. Be sure to click subscribe or follow on your favorite podcast platform. Share us with a friend, and we'll be back next week. Always remember, you deserve it, and you are worth it. Happy healthy.